Poor Lake, poor Gedney, and poor Old Ones, scientists to the last. What had they done that we would not have done in their place? God, what intelligence and persistence! What a facing of the incredible, just as those carven kinsmen and forebears had faced things only a little less incredible. Radiates, vegetables, monstrosities, star spawn, whatever they had been, they were men. Hello, 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 as the people of Brood Hollow say. Carney Pop here, and we're going to talk a little bit about Lovecraft. So, one thing that you should all know is that I'm a fiction writer myself, and when I write fiction, I tend to write science fiction or fantasy, especially about speculative things, things about non-humans, etc., etc. So, a little while ago, I started reading through all of Lovecraft's fiction as a way to kind of go through my ancestors. I love turn-of-the-century science fiction, turn-of-the-20th century science fiction. And I think that there's something that actually has been lost in a lot of ways by science fiction as it goes forward. And I think it's important when we're making stories to look back at the people who have done it before. And one of the reasons that I want to do this is that I think that a lot of people think that certain sci-fi concepts are younger than they appear. But science fiction is old. And the ideas that it's been doing have been shown for a very long time. So that's one piece. The other part of it is that, so why should you listen to me talk about Lovecraft? Well, I've read all of his fiction. All of the stories. So there's that. Something that you should note is that if you want to read any of these, not only is Lovecraft's work in the public domain, I'm pretty sure, so you can look up any on your computer. But if you have an e-reader, you can just get it on Kindle, and his completed works is like, the maximum it is $5 maybe. I'm reading it out of one called, literally Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft, The Complete Collection. So if you find that and download it, you'll have all of them. We're going to run through these alphabetically with a couple of twists. I'm basically going to take you down my path of reading them. And we're going to start in the novellas. So let's take a look here. Lovecraft has written 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 novellas. They make up an actual significant portion percentage-wise, page-length-wise, of his fiction. By comparison, he has written many, many short stories, and he has a lot of collaborations. Many of the collaborations suck. We're going to talk about all of them. But today, we're going to start with the first novella alphabetically, and honestly, a great place to start with Lovecraft in general. At the Mountains of Madness. So, when we're talking about At the Mountains of Madness, I'm going to do a brief plot summary. Basically, you have some people, they're scientists, they're in Antarctica, they're investigating things, and then things start to go awry. Some people go on an expedition, they don't come back, some people need to go find them, and basically, this slow, creeping dread about what has happened starts to come about as they begin to explore this. And the thing that is eventually found out is that there is this place which has the nexus of an old civilization. In fact, let me go to that one, because I think that it's a good passage. They come upon a place, and this is the description. For this place could be no ordinary city. It must have formed the primary nucleus and center of some archaic and unbelievable chapter of Earth's history, whose outward ramifications, recalled only dimly in the most obscure and distorted myths, had vanished utterly amidst the chaos of terrene convulsions long before any human race we know had shambled out of apedom. Unfortunately, in that passage, you can also hear a bit of Lovecraft's horrific racism. which, if you're getting ready to read Lovecraft, be prepared for horrific racism. He just talks about human races like they matter, like they're different species. So be ready for that. Also, be ready for the fact that Lovecraft was racist even for his time. So that has to be understood when reading his works. However, as we'll see in some of the later ones, Lovecraft's racism is sometimes very much undermined by his art in some very interesting ways. That's not too on display in here, but overall, I think it's going to be an interesting theme to look for as we go through it. Now, the things going on in the Mountains of Madness are some peak Lovecraft stuff. There is a slow creeping dread toward what the eventual reveal is. This is one that has two reveals, which often make for better stories because it's not a long build up into a single thing. This is something where once the reveals start happening, once the interesting stuff starts happening, it really goes there. You find out about the old ones and this whole civilization that they had, and that they came from other planets on interstellar wings that they could land here, and they used to live in the seas, but then they lived on the land as well, and they lost their capability to go to other planets. The old ones became stranded here, and they had tools called the Shoggoths, which were used to subdue the planet and used on other planets as well that they had conquered, and eventually their tools turn against them. So this is a piece of Lovecraft that is often overlooked. The totally ununderstandable is important. The unnameable, the terror from beyond the veil. But not all of the universe is like that. And that's another important piece of the Lovecraft tapestry, is that there are other beings, which even though they are so far beyond us puny humans, still have more to contend with. Overall, At the Mountains of Madness is a great story that I would highly recommend. I think it has some of the great monster design that Lovecraft really has, which I'm not sure is talked about enough, because I feel like a lot of people think Lovecraft and they think, oh, its wings were exactly unlike the wings of a bat. And he does that a lot. Do not get me wrong, especially when you read a lot of Lovecraft. I read most of the Lovecraft that I read in the span of like 4 months. So when you read a lot of Lovecraft back to back to back to back to back, you end up seeing that thing that he does where he describes things by not describing it. And sometimes it's really effective and sometimes it's not. But when he bothers to make creatures, it's super cool. The Shoggoth is this big plastic mass. There's giant 10-foot tall blind albino emperor penguins in this story, which is lit as shit. They're like shown as a monster and then they realize, oh, these are just giant blind penguins. As if that's not terrifying enough. Imagine going into a place where there's a bunch of vicious giant blind penguins shambling around. You wouldn't be comfortable. And the old ones designed themselves more vegetation than mammalian, and with a 5-pointed star head, and all their architecture is based on 5-pointed star architecture. It's super cool stuff. This one takes some time to get to. A lot of the first ones we're going to be talking about, the novellas, do take some time to read through. But I overall think that this one, at least, At the Mountains of Madness, is super, super worth it. This story has everything you could want from Lovecraft and shows some of his strength on full display. It doesn't have some of the craziest concepts that he deals with, but if you want like what good, solid Lovecraftian fare is, then I think that this is a really good one to read. That's about all that I have to say about this one in particular. I think that a lot of the things that are great about it are contained in how it tells its story and in experiencing its build-up. I think it has one of the better build-ups of a Lovecraft story, because some of the Lovecraft stories, you wait and wait and wait, and you get a reveal, and the reveal's really cool, but you're wondering if it needed all those pages. Excuse me. Bleh. But I feel like this one, those pages were, for the most part, deserved. I mentioned monsters. I mentioned the interstellar wings. I'm going to close this one off with a reading of a passage about the old ones, the beginning of their story. If you want to jump right in, which I don't fully recommend, but I think if you want to get into Lovecraft, but need that assurance that the story's going to be good, At the Mountains of Madness is broken up into parts. If you go to part 7, it is when the explorers detail what they know, what they could decipher of the Old One's story. This is near the beginning of that, and I'm going to just read a bit of it to close out this vlog, because I think that this is an example of how old sci-fi has some really, really great concepts in it. And sometimes we should look back to it, even if we're just looking for scale, you know what I mean? Because someone wrote this story in, I forget when this one particularly was written, but Lovecraft wrote from the late 19-teens to the mid-1930s, I think. And it has stuff about space and other dimensions and things that are really far-reaching in their foresight. So, to close it out, this passage is speaking about the old ones. They seemed able to traverse the interstellar ether on their vast membranous wings, thus oddly confirming some curious hill folklore long ago told me by an antiquarian colleague. They had lived under the sea a good deal, building fantastic cities and fighting terrific battles with nameless adversaries by means of intricate devices employing unknown principles of energy. Evidently, their scientific and mechanical knowledge far surpassed man's today, though they made use of its more widespread and elaborate forms only when obliged to. Some of the sculptures suggested that they had passed through a stage of mechanized life on other planets, but had receded upon finding its effects emotionally unsatisfying. Their preternatural toughness of organization and simplicity of natural wants made them peculiarly able to live on a high plane without the more specialized fruits of artificial manufacture, and even without garments except for occasional protection against the elements. I just want to say that in that small passage, we were told that not only could the old ones fly between planets and had very few needs due to their complex organic structure, but that they had gone through a phase where they lived in mechanized bodies and had decided it was not for them based on it being emotionally unsatisfying. Contained in that small paragraph is a whole other story about transhumanism and cyberpunk futures of aliens. So, that's it for this Lovecraft vlog. I'm going to be talking about Lovecraft stories probably about once a month, so stay tuned. We're going to go through them all. And at the end, I'm always going to give you a recommendation about whether or not you should read it. And At the Mountains of Madness is essential. If you are reading Lovecraft, you should read this one. And that's Carney Pop, signing off. See you next time.